Trustee Chin.
Here.
Trustee Hitchcock.
Here.
Trustee Proctor.
Here.
Trustee Watkins.
Here.
And Trustee Corzo present as well. Let the record reflect all trustees are in attendance. And we will be moving on to approval of our agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second. Thank you. Roll call vote. Trustee Chin.
Yes.
Trustee Hitchcock.
Aye.
Trustee Proctor.
Yes.
Trustee Watkins.
Yes.
And a yes from me as well. Moving on to our public statement. Okay. Public statements related to our agenda item. Please limit statements to 3 minutes. And please raise your hand if you would like to give a statement. Are people able to raise their hand? I'm not seeing that. Oh, yes. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't see the button.
Right. They can raise their hand if they wanted to make a statement on one of the items that's on the agenda today. Since it's a study session, it is limited to those items. And it does look like our translation is here. So if you want to explain how to utilize that.
Okay. Gracias por estar aquí. Si alguien ocupa traducción, por favor, levante la mano y empujen el botón que dice, tiene como un mundo, un botón de un mundo y pueden empezar la traducción. Okay, veo que Sonia tiene su mano levantada. So we do have one person for translation.
President Corzo, we have our translator set up, and he should be on his on the Spanish channel.
Okay, Sonia, por favor, empuje el botón para la traducción y esperamos que ya esté recibiendo la traducción. Gracias. Okay, so back to public comments. We do have one.
Randy, please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
So I just had a question about the process. I understand that there's more than one agenda item. So will you be taking the public comments at the time of the agenda item, or are you expecting the public comments to be like right now?
The comments would be now, I believe.
Okay. All right. Well, the only public agenda, the public statement that I wanted to make was with respect to the SRO agenda item. And the public statement that I wanted to make is that there was one trustee that voted in opposition to the other 4 trustees to maintain the contract and to not go along with that. I would note that that trustee is also up for in line for being the board president for the next term. Also, that trustee also voted against the equity resolution. And I would just like the 4 remaining trustees and the trustee that is in line to be newly seated on the board to take note of that the trustee that is not in line is male, oversteps his time frequently, and doesn't seem aligned with the equity principles, and does seem overly invested in maintaining the systems that don't take care of all of our students, but do take care of the systems that uphold the inequities. So I would just like to put that out there. It's bold. It's going to be unpopular. I'm sure there's going to be eye rolling, but I do want to put that out there and state that boldly. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. We have no other hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our proposed consent agenda. All items on the consent agenda are considered by the board to be routine and will be enacted by the board in one motion in form listed below. There will be no discussion on these items prior to the time the board votes on the motion unless members of the board, staff, or public request specific items be removed and discussed from the consent agenda. The superintendent and staff recommend approval of all consent items. Movement of any recommended consent item is appropriate at this time. And I'm seeing that we have Brandy's hand raised, and I'm just not sure if we didn't lower it before or if she just raised it for this item.
I have no hands raised on my screen, so I think we can go ahead with this consent item.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second. Roll call vote, Trustee Chin,
Yes.
Trustee Hitchcock,
Aye.
Trustee Proctor,
Yes.
Trustee Watkins,
Yes.
and a yes from me as well. Moving on to our discussion of process related to the SRO resolution.
I'd like to welcome everyone today. These study sessions are targeted and they last 2 hours from 1 to 3 p.m. Today, we'd like to welcome 2 guests who are with us and our facilitator. Our guests are Drew Corbett. He is the city manager for the city of San Mateo, and Ed Barbarini, chief of police for San Mateo. Our facilitator is Nicole Anderson. She has been doing equity work with our equity task force, and this school year we'll be continuing that work, working with the board on equity issues, and even working with our management team around some studies that we're going to do. So it's very exciting to have Nicole with us, and we really appreciate her expertise. Our district is grappling with all ways that we might better serve our youth. And today we will look at how to outreach to our school community and the greater community with our police department partners to support our students. These conversations will then be captured in our discipline matrix and our safety plans and other policies and practices. With us also as a guest, as an attendee, is Sarah Drinkwater. She's Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. This work often falls in that division, so she is listening and taking notes so that we are better prepared to move forward as your conversation takes us. So I turn this over to Nicole Anderson, who will lead us in this item.
All right, thank you, Joan. Thank you so much. Before we get started, I did want to just allow Noelia, if you wanted to chime in just from the board perspective in terms of kind of the purpose and also kind of background for this particular agenda item. I know Joan definitely gave a great understanding of background, but I want to just give an opportunity from the board perspective because I think you have a little history about the resolution that was passed before we get started.
Yeah, well, I can speak to just, my thinking around, the concern around the SRO item. And I think it would be great if maybe Shara can chime in just about the specific resolution, because kudos to her for finding it and, leading with putting that together. So I would just say that, the first time that I saw the SRO resolution on our agenda, I was concerned just because of my personal experience in our community and the fact that that I didn't feel like we had enough information, and the sense that I got was that the SRO contract was one that was just usually just approved without discussion, part of consent, without input from stakeholders, and so, you know, we did approve it that first year, and then the second year we actually we approved it for 2 years, and so I'll hand it over to Shara just to speak on the resolution a bit, and you know, the resolution in essence cut one of the years short, and we're, you know, wanting to give the community plenty of opportunities to give input and to specifically do it with equity in mind.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. The resolution itself was modeled off of something that Denver Public Schools passed earlier this year. You know, obviously everyone's aware of more of the kind of the national movement to really be looking at policing in general. And, you know, I think when we, I thought that was a good model, because I think sometimes the discussion can be, this complex issue can be simplified into something that, right, it's not just about SROs, it's a larger system of how we think about disciplining our kids and who we're disciplining and how we're disciplining them and how we're interacting with them. And so, you know, SRO piece is one piece of things, but our discipline data is another piece of things that needs to be examined, and our community input and impact is another piece of things that needs to be examined. And so that's what stood out to me about that resolution, and why, you know, I brought that to Trustee Corzo and Dr. Rosas, you know, to kind of think about using as a template and a model for how we kind of approach the work. So yeah, looking forward to, you know, digging into kind of what that process is going to look like, because I think, you know, as I mentioned in our last meeting, I think it's an opportunity for us not only to think about, you know, there's this particular issue which is really complex and multifaceted, but there's also the ability for us to really think through and reimagine what community engagement looks like moving forward. And there's many reasons to do that, right? One, this is a really personal issue for people. And two, we're in a different time where we can't engage with our community in the same way that we are used to engaging. And so there's a lot of reasons for us to think through that. And my hope would be that we would be able to leverage our new community engagement processes with other topics that emerge. And as we continue to kind of think about equity and lead with equity at the forefront, I think it's going to be really important for us to really think about how we're engaging all of our stakeholders, knowing that, you know, we don't hear from all of our community at our meetings.
Thank you for that. And I think it's helpful just for the community to know, because everyone may not be aware of the resolution and the details. So I think it's helpful to have some background. Why are we here today? Obviously, the resolution kind of calls out several things that you both mentioned around redefining kind of policing in schools, but also the disciplines matrix safety. And so although I believe the resolution, from the community's understanding, the resolution showed that their like the relationship based on the contract was terminated, but actually we're here to really redefine and kind of reimagine how this relationship will look and what are the roles. And so that's part of our purpose of having our special guest here tonight, today, on this Saturday, to really discuss this. And so I want to give a little context about that and make sure that it's really clear about why we're here, kind of a background, and then we have a couple of discussion questions we want to have with our chief and our city manager. Before we jump into the logistics and have our discussion, I just want to acknowledge my colleague who joined as well, Dr. Shelley Holt, who says Nicole Anderson, but we both share the same account. So she's really Dr. Holt. It's not me twice, but she'll be joining, kind of observing, may give some input, but she'll be working with us this year, specifically around the community forums and also supporting the task force work. So wanted to acknowledge her. And also another colleague who should be joining any moment is Kevin Taylor, who also will be working with us in the principals around doing our equity focused work and building capacity, because all of these great conversations today will actually fall on the school site. So we want our leaders to be prepared for this work and really give them opportunity to be supported. so that when accountability and monitoring is expected, we will have a really good sense of building capacity. I know that I want to give an opportunity to have our city manager and police chief introduce themselves officially, and then I'm going to jump into kind of our questioning, set a little context about equity, and get started. So I'll start with Police Chief Ed Barbarini. If you want to share who you are and your kind of history with the district, I think that'd be helpful.
Sure. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. My name's Ed. I've been here with the San Mateo Police Department for 6 months or so. Prior to coming to San Mateo, I was the police chief in the city of San Bruno for 5 or so years. Always my experience as being a police chief, specifically to San Bruno, is we always had a very close relationship with the local school district. The police department was intimately involved in the Big Lift and some literacy programs, and we always kind of worked side by side. So always enjoyed a nice, strong relationship there that I think proved fruitful. I will tell you, though, from an SRO perspective, I think I'm not alone when I'm working with other local agencies. And my history, my professional history is limited to this county for the most part. We've always looked to San Mateo as kind of been the model. They seem to have always been one step ahead when it comes to policing and specifically in dealing with our young folks and our students and young people in the schools. And the model that they've created is a strong one, and one that others have looked to kind of base their own programs off. So I did have a little bit of an advantage of why I come to a new local school district. Obviously, our high school district serves the city of San Bruno as well, so I didn't have to make too much of a transition when it came to the schools. I had some of those relationships already established, and it's always been a positive and productive relationship. We look to figure out a way to keep that going. Having said that, not only in this area of policing, but in all areas, we're always obviously looking to get better and see what we can do differently or be creative to better serve our stakeholders, and especially dealing with children is a big deal, and we want to make sure that we're doing it right. And if there's a better way to do it, we are very open and excited about having that conversation to figure out what that is. I just want to clear a couple things up. I understand what's the context of the conversation today. I do want folks to know that there's a kind of a collaborative model when it comes to our SRO program in the city amongst 2 separate school districts in the city, and we do the city continues to establish a strong youth services unit where our primary goal is to keep children out of the criminal justice system, and I think we've been very successful in doing that. We continue to do that. We do have we still have an SRO. The program's not as robust as it was a few months ago, obviously, but we still are very we recognize the importance of being able to interact with our young people in a positive and effective way, rather than simply being reactive and relying on the criminal justice system to solve our problems. We know that that's not the answer. So we are we're looking forward to the conversation. We want to be part of the solution, and we will take whatever steps we can take on our end to make sure at the end of the day that our young people are being served in the manner that they deserve, which is our ultimate goal.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate that so much. Appreciate that. Drew Corbett, City Manager. You want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Drew Corbett, City Manager. I've been with the City of San Mateo for about 5 years now. I've been the City Manager for just under 2 years. Prior to becoming City Manager, I was the city's Finance Director. I've been in local government for about 15 years, predominantly in the finance world. I've worked for the cities of Menlo Park and Sunnyvale, in addition to San Mateo. Prior to getting into local government, I spent 5 years in high-tech finance, and prior to doing that, I was a public school educator in California for a couple years, way back early in my career. And just thank you for having us here today. We are very happy to be a part of this conversation and enjoy our relationship with the school district, and look forward to continuing that relationship and continuing the discussion on how we can improve the outcomes for the students of the district and the students of the city. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, both of you. We appreciate you being here. And as we get ready to start, Ed, I appreciate you giving a little context of the work that already is being done. And so there are a couple questions that I'll ask of both of you. But for the whole group, just for the sake of this conversation, I just want to remind us of the work that we're doing and make sure that I remind you about the safety that needs to happen in this space today, and just want to make sure we're all committed to this as we go deeper into our conversations. So I want to remind us of our 4 agreements that often the task force looks at, but just remind us as a collective community that this work is super powerful. Obviously, talking about policing in schools brings up issues of race, issues of inequities, historical issues that have happened long before we were on this planet. And these are the things that we're going to unpack together. So sometimes they can feel very uncomfortable, but we want to make sure everyone is safe. So I like to remind us of this in terms of our agreement, that everyone has a space in this work, that no one should feel judged or feel attacked. So as a facilitator, I always want to remind people about my style in terms of how I expect the work to go. And so these 4 agreements really help us. They're inspired by Gwen Singleton's work. And again, just thinking about staying engaged, experiencing discomfort, speaking our truth, expecting and accepting non-closure. And these are all really important when we have these dialogues and we engage in this work together, because this is a partnership that will continue, and there will be challenges moving forward because we are addressing the system. And often when we're addressing system issues, when change happens, there becomes this discomfort. And so we want to make sure we remind everyone of these, and these 4 agreements are really helpful to remind us as we embark on our work together today and moving forward. So I just want to remind us of those agreements and hope those work for everyone as we continue through. And also want to remind you of why we're here, right? So the board did also adopt a statement, an equity statement. So when we use the word equity, just want to make sure we have context for our conversation today when we talk about what we want to see as success and what this work is about. So just want to remind you of some of the work that's been done around addressing what equity actually looks like. So I think this is important to have context even for the community, to see that equity is really about making sure each child receives what he or she needs. And again, developing to their full academic and social potential. So this dialogue today really fits into that. So we want to make sure we just remember why we're here and what equity looks like for San Mateo Foster City School District as we all engage in this work together. So I just want to make sure I give context to that. And this, as you see on the side, is kind of like the elephant in the blind men process, right? We're all still working towards what equity is. We want to see it. It has to be, very common language, and it's like the blind man filling on the elephant. They all see different perspectives, so that's why this work is so valuable today, to have this dialogue about our differences, but also coming together to have common language around this work. So I just want to remind us about our lens by which we do this work in San Mateo, Foster City, and also that as we talk about the SRO resolution and policing in schools, the roles, relationships, that this is important, that we're all looking at. We're trying to create equity for all of our students. Okay. So with that, I want to kind of jump into our dialogue today. And so I know Ed and Drew, there's a couple of questions I think that are really helpful for the board and board members. What I want to do is ask each question, but then also allow you to jump in and kind of have a discussion because maybe you have a follow-up question, but this is designed to be a discussion, obviously, around a partnership. So I want to make sure that although it feels panel-like, it's definitely a dialogue, if that makes sense. So I know, Drew, Ed, you started us off with just kind of what the current relationship looks like in some of the programs, but maybe you want to jump in a little bit deeper and talk about, what are your current programs that you actually have in place? Obviously, there's some things we want to do better, but really helping us understand contextually what is currently in place that you're utilizing to address equity for students with regards to policing in schools, and then we can talk about what does that look like in the future in terms of success.
Sure. Thank you. Our ultimate goal, and it sounds very basic, it sounds very obvious, but we want to make sure that students have a safe and comfortable environment in which they can learn and be successful, and that's kind of been our approach all along. The SRO program, the purpose of an SRO program has kind of evolved over time. One of our main focuses and our main priorities with the program is to, like I mentioned earlier, is to keep our young people, our students, young people throughout the city outside of the system, because we know once you enter into the criminal justice system, that can lead to a pattern that may affect you for the rest of your life. And if we can provide an alternative to that, rather than simply forwarding cases to the district attorney's office that end up in the court system, which creates a a long and tenuous journey for a young person who may have made a mistake or may have had a lapse in judgment. We want to do that. We want to be able to fill that gap. We have a pretty robust youth services unit within our police department that we're very fortunate to have. We have a strong partnership with the probation department that have actually assigned a full-time probation officer to our program, not with the goal of putting students on probation or young people on probation, but to prevent them from ever getting there. So when we do run into situations where we find that students have either committed minor crimes or there's some red flags, regarding maybe attendance issues or some behaviors that exceed simple, basic misbehaviors that I was guilty of when I was in school, and that kind of exceed that, or kind of send a message to school staff that, hey, there could be some problems here that could lead to young people getting into trouble. What we try to do is we try to provide an alternative, and if a minor crime is committed, rather than simply taking a report like we've done in the past and submitting that report to be filed in some case and having the student and family members have to make a court appearance, we've developed a diversion program here at the police department that brings in the family, brings in the student, and encompasses some counseling, we identify where the problem may be, whether it's anger management, whether it's whatever the situation may be. What we provide, we set up a program and provide some real clear and what we believe to be tangible goals for not only the student, but also in partnership with the family. And successful completion of that diversion program results in us being able to resolve it in more of a restorative justice process rather than a simple another statistic in the criminal justice program. And the end result that what we found is there's no baggage. There's nothing that tails that young person further down the road that we've all seen, can prevent students from kind of getting a fair shake down the road because they may have made some mistakes earlier on. And two, I think, we're providing them with tools and providing them with some resources that hopefully will promote their success and their being successful moving forward. Now, when we talk about how to measure that, that's the challenging part. I think in focusing on keeping young people out of the criminal justice system, we have some very good data, very strong data on that, and we believe we've been extremely successful. And I think especially with middle school students, I think that the way the program is set up, we're able to kind of track and monitor them in a non-statistical or maybe not as scientific process as it could be collected. But we were able to kind of follow their progress, into high school because of the whole SRO model. After that, we're not very good at collecting data. So from a demographic perspective or from a follow-up perspective after the fact, that's probably where our blind spot is when it comes to collecting that type of data. And I don't know that, there's part of me that I don't know what the right answer is, because I don't know that we, as a police agency, we should be seeking that data. Maybe we should be looking to somebody else to roll that, because I don't know that I'd be comfortable having, if my child made a mistake early on and had to go through a diversion process, that I would want them being tracked by any type of law enforcement.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer to that is. I know that when we're asked the basic question about, how we're achieving our goal as far as providing a strong alternative to the traditional criminal justice process, I think we have good, strong data there. I just don't know that we have a good measurable in the long term to kind of determine whether the counseling services and the other tools that we provide to our young people are having, what kind of lasting effect they're having.
Got it. Okay, I appreciate that. Drew, do you want to add to that? Just kind of what does this equity and kind of success look like, through the SRO program? You want to add anything to that?
I don't really think I can add anything above what Chief Barbarini indicated.
Okay, excellent. So board members, do you have any follow-up questions for that piece? Because I know he gave a little context about what it currently looks like, some of the services in place. It sounds like there's a focus on wanting to provide additional resources besides just the criminalization piece, right, going into the system. And so I want to see if there's any questions you have around how this looks like in terms of success. if we were to have, you know, what this partnership looks like with regards to the SRO program. So any board members want to ask any follow-up questions?
All right, can I pick us up a minute? I have a question more about like process and outcomes for this time. So what's our goal for the end of this time?
So excuse me. Part of what in your resolution, you have some time frames that you clearly set out that require the task force as well as some community forums to give some input about redefining, reimagining how you're going to address student discipline, how you're going to address in the relationship with your SROs, with your police department. So this is part of it, just kind of in alignment with your resolution around some of the time frames that have been set. And so we can go through all those now, or we can kind of wait till our discussion ends. But you let me know, Shar, in terms of that piece.
I'm sorry. Let me just say that I thought that we were also establishing what we want to see success look like. So this is telling us what we have right now, but now I thought we wanted our board members to share what they hoped success would look like so that we know where we're trying to go. So is that this part now?
So yeah, I think maybe there's some yeah, I mean, I'm fine having this conversation. I think for me though, I want to be like, we still don't have a clearly defined process, and my understanding is that we were going to talk about that. Like, our input is important, but that should not be absent of what we hear from the community. And so I feel like so for me, the success question is like, how do we know if our community engagement has been successful? Like, we have a lot of time to talk about what success for this program looks like. We don't have a lot of time to make a plan for what our community outreach is going to look like. And so I don't want to walk away from this and not have that. And so that's my concern.
Yeah, so just to kind of structure, rephrase kind of the questioning is around what does success look like? And I think to start that conversation is, what does it currently look like? Because the resolution from the board was a termination of this relationship based on a contract. But also in the resolution, you called out that you want to reimagine what this looks like in terms of discipline in schools. So when we talk about what does success look like, absolutely, Shar, one of the things that's in your resolution actually talks about multiple community forums to allow your community to weigh in. And so having students, having parents is part of that process, which is on a list. I think in your last board meeting, you all kind of went through that in terms of what are the next steps to address what you called out in the resolution. So I think this is really establishing amongst those that have the power and the relationships here to really talk about what could this look like moving forward. But also you do have additional data that you need to collect to determine what that looks like. So part of this discussion is to really help gather input for you as a board, but also you have multiple people who still need to be brought in. So absolutely, Shara, and you have multiple dates coming up where that will take place, as well as your task force, which you've also called out to support this process too. So this is just kind of the beginning, I believe. It's not the end, it's getting us started, but I think we need to have good context of, again, what do you envision as success looking like with this process based on your resolution? So hopefully that helps a little bit.
And there were 3 questions, really, and they're all interrelated. Right. It's what will the success look like? How will we measure it? How will we know when we got there? What questions do we want to ask? So when we go out, how do we want to ask the staff, families, students, and how do we conduct that outreach to the community? So all those 3 types of questions have to be started here so that staff know how to keep moving.
So we're just kind of on the first part of the dialogue, if that makes sense. So we're going to unpack all of this, but first was just starting with what is some context about what the current program even looked like, because I don't know if we all have all the details of that, but now what does success look like moving forward? And then we will talk about how do we measure that, and also who needs to be at the table to hear those voices, and what do we ask them? What information do we need to know from our community? So board members, great time. Now jump in and let's know, what does success look like for you in this particular work based on what you called out in your resolution?
So I'm happy to jump in next, and I want to be super honest. So as a board, we have had, our police department come and present to us on the SRO contract, right? I want to say we've had discussions about this like at least 2 or 3 times already. And so a lot of our concerns have been raised there. And I think the question that is being posed right now to me is a little confusing because of the fact that something that I have said in multiple other meetings that we've had about this is that I understand like the role that the SRO program has been serving in our district, but part of what I am questioning and have been questioning for years now is that the best way for us to even get our students those services, right? They've gotten the great program. You know, the diversion is important, yet, you know, when we have students that are in crisis or that, you know, have had to interact with our SROs, are there better ways for those students to get those needs met by a licensed social worker or some other, you know, person that is not a police officer with a uniform and a gun, who, by the way, is getting paid at the salary of a police officer, not like, you know, as we know in our society, a lot of social services are really underfunded, and even the people that work in those roles are underpaid. Right. And that's not the case with our police department. I think our police officers are paid really well, and we have, you know, we have been financially investing in that. Mm-hmm. And my question is, you know, well, actually, my thinking period in general is, can we get our students all of these same supports while investing in the community and people that come from the community and people that look like them and people that are, you know, a lot of what I've heard is like, you know, our police, our SROs, they're great mentors. They have great relationships with the kids. That's great. There are other people that can have great relationships with the kids. There are other ways that we can, I honestly, I think so. I think the question is like, oh, what will a good partnership look like? And my thing is, I don't even think that we need to have one in the way that we have in the past.
Right. So I appreciate that feedback, Noelia. I think in your resolution that was pretty clear because you all terminated that contract, but we do want to ask about what success looks like in terms of equity, because maybe we need to redefine what that role is of officers. The reality is we're in a time where school safety, so you all called out school safety. So what does that look like, right? When there is an issue that happens, you want to kind of define that piece. And I think that's what this discussion is about. So moving forward, you can be very clear on what does this relationship look like, and absolutely, what do those services look like? But I think because of we want to have the officers, and they're obviously in this space, representation is in this space of what does that relationship look like? Because the reality is that you're going to have school personnel that may need to call the police. And I think we need to talk about what does it look like in terms of even retraining staff on what do you call the police for? What do those services look like? But the reality is that you also have a community that our kids live in where officers will be interacting with the community. So I think this is where we want to talk about what does success look like, knowing that we're living in the same space. Police are in the city, our schools are in the city. How does this look even if police officers aren't on campus, if that's what your resolution is called out? So maybe y'all can kind of share that piece, because I think this is important to clarify based on what you called out in your resolution. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. And so at that point, I think what success would look like is, at least from, you know, my own opinion is, you know, if we know that we have a police officer that is patrolling an area that, you know, certain schools are in, that they, you know, they know who to touch base with if they do happen to get called to one of our schools, that you know, they still, you know, patrol the area after hours and make sure there's not vandalism, things like that. Yeah, those are just initial thoughts, but that's it for me, to be honest.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in? What does this look like in terms of success?
I can jump in, though I'm probably not going to answer your question. For me, it's hard, and maybe I'm not articulating this clearly. I don't believe this is the question we should be answering right now at this point in the process. I believe that I think one of the things that we said based on the resolution is we need data. We don't have good data from our SRO program. We don't have the data from our district around discipline and disproportionality, right? We don't actually know what we're talking about to say whether this does really need to be redefined or not. We don't have the data that we need to be able to make that statement. That's the quantifiable data, right? We also don't have the qualitative data. We have not listened to all of our stakeholders. So for me to make a statement about what success is going to look like absent all of that is not informed.
Right.
That, you know, this can't be a decision based on, I think that's part of the problem, right? Like we're fortunate now to have a diverse board. When that doesn't exist and you have a group of people making a decision about what should happen for our kids, particularly our most vulnerable youth, about what we think it should be, right? That it can't be how we make our decisions. And so for me, for us to sit here and have a conversation about what this should look like, absent all of that data. So I would like for us to get really clear around what that is, right? What is the data that we want? Who do we need to hear from? What does that look like? How do we know if we've heard from the appropriate people, you know, from the appropriate amounts of people, all of the stakeholders that we want to hear from? How are we going to get the answers to the questions that we want, right? What are the questions that we want to ask? Like, I would like for us to focus there, but if I am, you know, I know that Noelia and I are the only ones that have spoken, so if other folks have thoughts, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, please do. Other board members, please jump in. Thoughts on this?
I'll jump in. I think I agree. I think that this is not like, this isn't the answer we can come to. I can just say in general terms that my goal for the success of a program would be that our students are safe and healthy. And I think that safety comes in many forms, one being physical safety, but I think also mental and social emotional health is really important. So I think figuring out from our community and our school administrators and teachers and everybody, kind of hearing from everybody is where we're going to develop where this goes. For me, you know, we just had one of our school site visits virtually, and we were reminded that school is a safe place for so many students. And so I think that, you know, we really need to figure out what that environment looks like, what safety means for kids. And I think a lot of us will think maybe physical safety, but I think it's a lot more than that. And so I think we need to get there. I would be curious to know, and I'm sure this is somewhere, but when did this like SRO relationship start, and what were the factors at that time? Because maybe now we're in such a different place. Maybe it was a physical safety issue at the time, and I don't know I don't have that history. So I think just kind of figuring out where we started and what was the purpose, and bringing that to where we are now might be helpful. But again, it's not a specific answer other than we need more information and we need to hear from more people.
Anyone else want to jump in from the board?
So I think that kind of is the answer, right? In order for this program or whatever is reimagined to be successful, we want to hear from key stakeholders in the community. I think that's your answer.
Yep. All right. Perfect.
Yeah.
Anyone jump in?
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with Trustee Watkins. I feel like we're doing sort of end round here, where, you know, I think the resolution is set up for a number of listening sessions and a number of ways for us to go out to the community. And in some ways, we're kind of defining success before we even have those meetings and gathering that data. And so I feel like that's sort of, like I said, sort of end round there. Obviously, though, I mean, I think we kind of can all figure out or kind of think what we think success will be, but I think it's probably more important that we actually go through the process to get to that point.
Good. I appreciate that. Okay, I appreciate that. I think in continued discussion, just to give a little context, I think what your discussion is very rich, and the struggle you're having, I think is very normal, because you have to think about the timing of all this, right? The timing of it, resolution was passed, but this discussion actually isn't happening prior to that resolution being passed. This is after the fact. So this is very normal struggle. We got to go back to, okay, what data don't we have? Like I heard very clearly also from Ed, like we don't have enough data, right? We still need to hear from our community, and I'm not sure we had that time to wrestle with that, but the resolution is very clear and you have timelines. So I want to make sure we're clear on why this struggle is happening but that we actually can collectively still have the same outcomes that you desire. Success can be experienced, but you do have to understand that the timing of this is, we didn't have these discussions, but resolution was passed. So that's where you're at this point. So what we want to do is get to, okay, let's hear from the community, right? You want to hear that, you want to get the data, and then you're going to have to go back to your resolution and actually go through this. How do we redefine safety? Those are great questions. How do we educate the community, educate our educators in terms of our principals, our teachers, on what the role of officers are? These are all discussions that have to happen. What is the clear protocol on patrolling schools? And it sounds like, I think Allison had a great question of what was the context when this first relationship first started. So I think a lot of these things had to be wrestled with, but again, your resolution has been passed. So I think that's where this struggle comes from, is that we have some information we maybe didn't have earlier. So now we're sitting down and we're gonna wrestle with it. Use your task force. You have several community forums that are scheduled, and so I think you're gonna get to a place of being able to redefine it for safety, revise your discipline matrix, and come back to this resolution and really, again, did we acquire success as we envisioned? So I want to go into your question that you have, like this whole outreach piece. What are the questions we ask of our community? Because I do want to hear that, and I wonder, Ed or Drew, maybe you want to kind of give us a little context about, what are some of those questions we need to know? Maybe there's some data we don't have. What is it we want to know from our community about their qualitative lived experiences in this work? So I'll let you both start, and then George, you can jump in.
I get, so from a law enforcement perspective, I mean, I think there are, we would maybe like to clearly should the, and again, I'm not here for I'm not here in a role to advocate one way or the other. I do want the board to arrive at whatever conclusion is best for them. And if we're part of that in an SRO capacity, great. We will always make ourselves available as best we can as a resource for the schools. They're a very important component to what we do, and we'll continue to do that to the best of our ability. But should we go down, should we embark on this partnership, and should we find some value in it? I mean, I think identifying clear expectations would be a good start. And I think, our primary and most important stakeholder in our mind are our students. Without our students, nothing else matters. And then that obviously evolves to parents or guardians, to school staff, and then a broader community kind of dialogue, because our schools do have an impact on the surrounding communities. I would also include existing and former SROs, because I'll be honest with you, the SRO position is a unique position in police departments. One of the most passionate. It's staffed by probably the most passionate people we have in this business. It's not like being a traffic officer or an investigator. There's a real investment into the young people, and these relationships often last for years after our young people move on. But I think that I would start with that group and start to identify expectations, like a simple question like, what would you be looking for in an SRO program? Right? What are a lot of the questions that were asked here is what's the point, really? I mean, what's the purpose of having an SRO program, and is there value? I know what my responses to some of those questions would be, but I don't know what others would be. So I think that would be of value. I think that and I think experiential questions would be great of both students, parents, and staff as far as their interaction with SROs and what they found to be beneficial and what they would have liked to see more, or maybe something different. I know I would like to learn that information. That would make not only our SROs better, but probably our police officers stronger with the responses to those questions. And then I guess some general questions about to students and to parents is how, asking students, how safe do you feel at school, and what contributes to either that feeling of safety and security or a lack of feeling that way, whether it's in a physical sense or a mental or social or emotional sense. So I think all those questions would be relevant to us. We'd like to know that. I mean, I will be completely honest. When I said that we have some good data, we have good data about, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our physical safety is kind of what we're tasked with at the core of what we do. We don't want people to get hurt, and that's our mission in life as a police department for the most part. But you know, a lot more goes along with that. So I think that I think we've evolved from that physical, you know, providing a sense of physical safety into something much more, and the SRO program has been part of that. But we'd love to know what those experiences are. The data that I mentioned that I think that we have and that we have a good handle on is, you know, the focus of keeping kids out of the system. I think we have good data there to show that had it not been for you know, some SROs or the existence of the SRO program, a lot of those young people would have just been simply, you know, referred to the criminal justice system. So I think that data is pretty available, and I think that we can work with the district to provide that. I think the data that is much more difficult for us is the questions I just mentioned. We conduct surveys of our students and of our parents that go through our training programs, but they're limited questions and they're immediate questions. We ask those questions immediately upon completion of like our anti-bullying or GREAT or some of our other programs. So we don't have a mechanism or capacity to kind of follow up in the long term. So I think that would be of value to us. And then there are some things that we just, as a police department, I think I mean, my boss is on the line here, so if he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it exceeds our scope. I mean, we're uncomfortable as a department in tracking young people, whether it be via demographic information or what happened. You know, we don't want to overreach, I guess is my point, and we don't want to ask those questions and make it and start collecting data on students. We don't believe that that's appropriate. You know, we obviously want to reach those young people that are most vulnerable and require those services. But on the other hand, the last thing we want to do is to be viewed or perceived as some type of entity that is being intrusive or overstepping our bounds when we're asking certain questions. So I think there's questions that could be asked. I think another part of this dynamic, listening to the conversation of the board, and I don't envy you in the work that you have, is who asks those questions and how are they framed, and you know, and because I think who's asking them and how they're presented can attribute to the validity of a lot of the data that you're going to get back. Because I know if a police officer asks somebody a question or a police department asks someone a question, their response or their approach to that may be totally different if they're asked by some other type of individual or organization. So that's just my initial thought. I mean, I didn't anticipate coming into this discussion to talk about. I know the process is yours, and I don't want to influence or dictate the process. But that would be, if I wanted to learn more about my SRO program, that would probably where I would want to start. But again, my fear would be I walk a fine line because I don't want to be over the top with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that, Ed. Drew, do you want to add anything to that piece?
Sure. Just briefly. I mean, it sounds like, you know, the district is having a broad discussion about how it can best serve its students, and I think the SRO program is a piece of that discussion, and how the SRO program fits in best serving its students. And you know, I think that whether that is, you know, going back to the program as it was, whether it's shifting away from the program as it was, whether it's doing something different, reimagining the SRO program, you know, however we can be of support and service in terms of helping to determine what the best route for the district is. I mean, I think we want to get to the same place, which is how are the youth of San Mateo best served, and we want to get to a place with whatever the SRO program ends up looking like, to where we're all comfortable that the youth are being served, and that we can measure those outcomes in however we ought to do so. So, you know, again, we're here to serve, to support. We appreciate having a seat at the table in this discussion to help get to that outcome, whatever that outcome may be.
Thank you, Drew. Appreciate that. Board members, just want to ask you to kind of chime in. Is this kind of the question we went to? Like, what is it that you want to know from your staff, from your students, from your families? What might those questions look like? What might those questions be that will help you to really better understand the needs with regards to student safety on campus?
I have it written down here, you know, is what do we want to get from this, right? What is the outcome we want? Do we want SROs, or are we looking kind of just at a whole of, we just want the best for our students and for them to be equipped to, you know, life. And maybe the thought is we want to provide them with different supports before they reach maybe an SRO or a police officer is called. I mean, this is, you know, I think we have an opportunity to, I'm viewing it as a way that we can start to shape the future for, you know, a better tomorrow. And if we all work together and we're all just creating a positive impact and providing whatever support is needed for each individual child to be successful, I think that's great. And is one of them is, you know, police relationships. I think, and so I don't know. I think what I would be interested in knowing what the data is without having an SRO. How are our kids doing? Does that make sense? I think that would be interesting.
Okay.
I don't know. And, you know, I hate to say it, but like for the data, I don't recall, does it show race, the race of each kid? Like, is a certain audience being targeted? I think that's something too. I also think, you know, parents, I heard a parent say that I guess the kid, their child was questioned or whatever. And so, you know, that brings some concerns from parents. So I think, I don't know. I just really want to get everybody's opinion and thoughts, you know?
Do you mind if I add something real quick with the group? I can't see everybody, unfortunately, but I'm wondering if what we're really seeking is clarity, because what I hear over and over again, and this is Dr. Holt, what I hear over and over again is that we're just not clear about how this came to be, but also what we want moving forward. And so I'm wondering if what you're saying, Ms. Hitchcock, could be couched in, we want clarity as to how we got to SROs, what are they doing, what is the impact moving forward, and how could, you know, whatever services the students need be better served in a different capacity, and what are the needs for an SRO? Does that kind of encapsulate it?
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, if anyone else want to jump in, Karen, what you want to gather from this, questions you want to hear from the community.
So, hearing what Chief Barbarini had talked about, not collecting data for our youth does seem right. I think that, honestly, I was thinking back when I was in high school and we did some stupid stuff. So I wouldn't want anything to happen that tracks people off into the future. And so I do think about that. However, it's sort of contrary to sort of what we're looking at in terms of we need some demographic information. And so maybe it's the demographic information that we would need or collect. The other thing I would think is that, you know, I have to look at this process as this is sort of the beginning of the process. And it's not gonna, it's a long process, and it's not because of what's going on or anything in, or the resolution in terms of how the time is set up, but the reality of the situation is that we're in distance learning, right? I mean, we are basically, probably going to be in distance learning through Christmas. And then as we bring back students to campus, we're going to be doing it in a slow, methodical way. And so the idea is like, how does that affect what data we can actually collect even this year? And then the following year is the big issue, because really that's sort of like the data collection year. So I'm assuming that we're in this new normal and we go back to school in whatever, in person, in whatever shape and form that it's in. It won't be the same that it was before, but the issue is that what's different is that I'm pretty sure we won't have police on campus. And secondly, I think that we will have all of our counselors be there in person. So through Measure V, we were able to get counselors at every single school. And so when we talk about additional adults to be there for our students, to mentor, to be there, to be the ear, for them to lean on, it was this year. This year is when we're having all those counselors on campus, but we're in distance learning, so we don't have that true effect of them. I also think that, we did hire one social worker, and we have one social worker for the district. I think the idea is that it'd be great for us to expand that as well. And so my point is that we're in a very unique year right now in terms of, distance learning. The next year, we'll really be able to actually show where we have all these extra adults and everyone there, and really hopefully collect more data. And so my thought is that when you look at it and we're going out to the public, I mean, this is sort of a longer community building process to engage with a lot of people and to get that data, because we're honestly not going to know. You ask for what success is, and obviously there's two different things. There's the quantitative and qualitative. And I think we can talk about sort of the qualitative, but I don't necessarily know if we're ever going to have the quantitative in the way that we're going to want. And so I think it was sort of, Dr. Holt, if you're the right person who was on the NAACP meeting a while ago, you talked about it, how I think there was like a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year time frame or something like that, where really you go through and set everything up in the first couple of years. 5 years is sort of getting really off the ground, and you collecting that data, and you're really not going to know till 10 years down the road whether you really made an impact and whether you really are successful. And Dr. Holt, if you are that person that was on the call, you please correct me if I'm wrong on those timelines, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. And so I know that we're sort of talking about like process. And again, I feel like we're sort of doing an end around here because I do think we need to listen to the public. But in my mind, I feel like this is really just the basic, the very beginning of what is going to set up to be a very long and very thorough process of how we sort of build the community back together and build that relationship with the police, whether they're on campus or not. And so that's where I'm coming from.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Kenneth, for that perspective.
And Mr. Chen, yes, that is me, and you are spot on.
Yeah, our names didn't get changed. We're all Nicole. I think Kevin also, this is a good time. Kevin Taylor's on too. Kevin's our other associate who'll be working with our principals and district leadership. So welcome, Kevin. All right, anyone else want to jump in around what are those, again, this question is centered around what is it we want to know from our families, our students, what data do we need to gather? Because that's a real concern about what does success look like. So just want to let others jump in.
In terms of data, we actually have quite a bit of that spelled out in the resolution, so we should be referencing that. And all of which should be disaggregated by race, ethnicity, age. So, suspensions, how often are either district administration or police called to schools, just all of that data that pertains both to discipline and law enforcement. So that's something that is spelled out that we should be leveraging. I also know that as it pertains to the SRO program specifically, we had quite a few data questions that, at least at the time, the answer was that that data didn't exist. So I think kind of going back into some of those, I don't have all of them off the top of my head, but I'm sure they're in our minutes from that discussion that we can pull. But, you know, some of them were around, you know, prevention of involvement with the GREAT program, prevention of involvement in gangs. So what does that data look like year over year? But we don't have that data. So it's hard to say if something's successful or not successful if we're not tracking whether or not, you know, that's working. So I think, and I know, you know, Trustee Corzo had, you know, other questions. I know that she asked as well that I don't have off the top of my head, but I think getting more data around that program specifically would also is also really helpful, because I do think data needs to be a huge part of what drives this discussion, and it needs to be disaggregated by race, because it's not, if it's working for one group and disproportionately not working for others, that's a problem, right? And that needs to be addressed, even if overall it looks like it's working. And so I think that that has to be the lens through which we're looking at all of these, because we know that exists. We know that disproportionality is a problem that exists everywhere, and we are not, we're not different, right? That's just how our systems are designed and how they work. And so there's some of it, there's some of that exists. How egregious that is or isn't, you know, it can be part of the discussion, but the fact that we know that there's going to be disproportionality and we need to be looking at it through that lens. In terms of our community, I mean, I think it's a lot of the same. Like for me, it's an overarching question around safety. Do you feel safe at school, in your community? What does safety look like to you? What does that mean to you? And again, disaggregating that, right? What safety looks like for certain people is different than what it looks like for other people. And who, I'll just say anecdotally, who has advocated for presence of armed police officers and who has advocated against it does break down based on racial lines often. And so we need to be leaning into that and listening to that and why that is and what that means. And so I think getting a sense from people of what that looks like. And I'll just say with this, and I said this at our last meeting, and maybe we'll be talking about the process, and maybe it's something that the Equity Task Force can dig into a little bit, both in terms of questions that are going to elicit the type of responses that we want, and format. Not everyone is going to feel comfortable in a session just saying what their experience is. So how do we get that information? And how do we ensure that the information we're collecting from the community represents who's in the community? So something that, I don't know if I said it at a meeting or if I just mentioned it to Dr. Rosas when we were having a conversation, but I would like to see the community participation mirror our community. So percentage of, again, broken down by race. X number of Asian students in their family, that's the percentage at least, right? It can go above that, but at least that should be what we're getting. Our Latino families, right? Our white, all of our families, there needs to be proportionate representation in terms of their participation in the process, because we can't only be hearing 80%. We can't only be hearing from the people that we hear from at our board meetings, right? And so we need, the way that I think through how we might quantify that is just based on what our district stats look like of students and families, and trying to mirror that in terms of who we're hearing from in the community.
Okay. Excellent. Any other last thoughts before we start to wrap up our discussion and talk about next steps? Any other last thoughts?
I had just one thing to add to what Trustee Watkins said. So Trustee Watkins mentioned the number of calls that are coming for police to come. I would be curious also to know the types of these calls, and I'm sure she probably maybe meant that as well, but I'd be curious for how many are mental health issues, if there's like anxiety, depression, etc. type calls, and versus how many are for like students being violent or whatever the other reasons are. I'd be curious to see kind of
how that breaks down. And then in terms of talking to our community, also really hearing from parents, because I think what my kids, what their answer might be to what makes them feel safe at school might be different than what I think. And so having that group of, making sure we're talking to all different groups and things. And I think another voice that I hear quite often are community members who no longer have students. And so I think we need to make sure we're identifying that as well, just because there may be this idea, like an older school idea that, police are on campus because a bad guy might come or something. And so really understanding who we're talking to, and that we have these buckets and we can easily identify where the different perspectives are coming from.
Excellent.
I have a couple as well. So I think a really foundational question would be, when you interact with police in general, do you feel safe or do you feel scared? Right? Like, would you call the police for, I'm just thinking from the lens of someone that, let's say they're undocumented, let's say there's lots of reasons why calling the police would be a super, super last resort, because they don't want to be involved in that system. And so thinking about, let's say a student, right, gets into something minor and, an SRO calls their family. And I know these things have happened. And that's, I think, part of what, I guess, let me pause and backtrack. There's data that we know that I've asked for years that we do not have and that we will not have. So I just want to kind of put that out there. For example, we know we have data about how much money we have spent on our SRO program for the past several years. What we do not know is how much exact time our SROs spent on each of our campuses, right? We do not know that. We will not know that. From my understanding, at least. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But so that, I think, is just those are very objective questions that could be posed to the community. This is we have spent X amount of dollars. How much time would you want SROs to be, spending with students, going through the great curriculum, dealing with other minor things, right? Like the components of the SRO program, how much time is actually spent on that? Or would the community feel like, for what we're spending, this amount of time providing these services makes sense to me, right? Those are some general questions. Then there's who in our community feels safer knowing that police are interacting with their children? Who doesn't feel safer? I think also Shard spoke to this a little bit, right? We already know that we will have folks in our community who generally feel safer when police are around, and so those are things that I think we can expect, and maybe we want to tailor different sets of questions. Maybe not. I think that's something we should kind of spend a little time thinking about. Also, another thing that's kind of that I'm just thinking about is, if we were, let's say SMPD and our city really believe in our SRO program, and they want to fund one SRO for all of our schools, and let's say that was an opportunity that was presented. In that case, what would be different, right? So there's kind of different questions for me. If there was an SRO that was shared between all of our schools, and we knew that we were going to get 40 to 50 hours or, school hours every week where SROs are for our schools only, what should that time be spent doing? How many great classes? Did they go through the whole curriculum? Who is it being? I know right now I think it's all 6th grade. Sorry, those are, yeah.
Okay.
I hope there's some helpful in all of that.
Now, this is helpful, Noelia, and I appreciate each of you sharing your perspective, because these are the things that need to come up in terms of this discussion about what are your next steps, what does success look like. And I want to just kind of, for the sake of time, I want to make sure I wrap up this piece about the outreach, right? Because you're going to have to actually do some outreach, and we have kind of a plan for that based on what your resolution has called out. So just reminding us of, even in this outreach, you want to have a community-driven process. You call that out. So it's very clear you need to hear multiple perspectives, disaggregate by race, make sure you ask clear questions about how people feel in terms of safety, and make sure you really connect those to who people are in terms of ethnicity, language. There's a lot of cultural factors that are going to play into how these questions may be answered differently, and even the safety of even being in a space to answer those, depending on who's asking the question. I heard you clearly say, and I'm actually clearly reading, that you want to complete this process by December 31st. So I want to call out that this is a very quick process, and I think, Ken, you had mentioned it, that, it resonated with you about go slow to go fast, right? And this is going to take time to implement change. So part of your plan moving forward to do outreach is we came up with several dates to meet your deadline of the 31st. To make sure you at least have some information. I know that that's such a quick turnaround that you're not going to have a lot of time to get every single data point you want, but I believe there's also leveraging the task force, but I think it's more of a long-term body structure in your system to give you input and recommendations as a board. So I want to just remind you of a couple of next steps, and just make sure I'm hearing clearly. I'm reading your resolution. This is kind of the plan that has been laid out. Is that you want to have some community input, and we have 3 dates on the calendar: October 26th, which is coming at the end of this month, and then a week later, November 2nd, and another week later, November 9th. And in those, we can have students, we can have parents, we can have community. And so we can talk about that with the task force to be able to really think about how is that going to look. Of course, myself, Dr. Holt, will be supporting that facilitation of those. So we want to ensure that we do talk, and Noelia, this may be a conversation with you as president to talk offline about how this looks in terms of the information to come back to the board, because a lot of the discussion today was helpful, but you're going to need additional time to really flesh this out. And again, what data do you need? Your staff is going to be impacted by this, because there's several data points that you called out here about suspensions and all those things that you called out around how do you make this decision moving forward. And using your task force is going to be a subcommittee for SRO and the discipline matrix revision. So that's going to take time, but December 31st was your kind of deadline. So the goal is to get as much information as possible through those 3 community forums, and also have a debriefing about the community forums with the task force in order to present something to you in your December meeting. So that's the goal, but it's going to go fast, and I want to make sure you're clear about, you may not have all the data and information you need, but I think for today, moving forward, to close this up, I think it would be helpful with our guests, Drew and Ed, to really clarify as a board kind of vision moving forward in terms of next steps when you want to revisit this conversation. What does that timeline look like for you as a board in regards to that? Because I think it sounds like you don't have enough information, but we did make a decision about terminating that contract for this year. And the kids, again, are not in school right now. So this might give you a little bit more time to wrestle with this. But I think it'd be helpful in closing out, how you see your next steps moving forward. And I've given you dates, timelines. December is what you've given yourself. So I just want to make sure we're clear moving forward as we facilitate these sessions coming up, and also with your task force, who will be tasked to really wrestle with this issue.
I mean, I think when we have, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that what's more important to me is that we get really solid community input versus meeting that specific deadline. So that's my personal opinion. I do know that we're not in school. We do want to be efficient. We do want to get things done quickly, but not if we have to rush through them. So I'm open to extending some of the dates, but I don't know how others feel.
A couple of things. One, in terms of the community outreach sessions, I think we need to think about I don't think they should just be general outreach sessions. I think they should be targeted. And I think having, and I don't know every single group that would represent, but I think thinking, I think Nicole, you and your team can think a little bit about that. Potentially with some input from the Equity Task Force. But I don't think just general sessions to the point around folks are not going to feel comfortable. They're definitely not going to feel comfortable if they're the only person that looks like them in the room. So I think that needs to be really strategic. I'm aligned with Noelia in timeline. My concern is I would want to know what we're going to do with the extra time. Right? Like if it's extra time to wait to make a plan for 2 more months, then I don't want to give extra time. If it's extra time because we're going to do X this week, Y next week, Z next week in order to have a more solid plan, then I think bringing that to the board in terms of why more time would be helpful in terms of getting more people to the table, in terms of having a more strategic outreach. That's fine, but I think sometimes we have more time and then we still find ourselves under the same time crunch, making decisions that still potentially aren't as strategic as they could be. And so then all we've done is push the deadline. So that to me doesn't really make a lot of sense. So again, I think if there's reason why that is needed, let's have that conversation, but it needs to be strategic.
Shara, would it make sense? I think we still have some time, and I know our guests, we kept them a little longer than we wanted, but we have some time in our agenda today to talk about the priorities you have. Would that be maybe a good time to insert that conversation? Because I think time is also based on other priorities you all have, which then makes it really difficult for things to happen as fast as you'd like. So would that be a good use of time then? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then to your question around like, when do we, I think once we have the information that we need, I think that's a good time for, to cycle back and kind of share what we've learned and to see what that looks like. I think it would be great for Joe and you to follow up with Ed and Drew around the questions that we asked regarding the SRO program, because I think that data would be, if that data does exist, we were told at the time it doesn't. If it does, it'd be great to bring back to the conversation.
All right. Excellent. So I know that there's, I showed those 4 agreements and the last one was non-closure, right? And again, this is a reminder that there's non-closure with this type of work and we have lots of work to do. So I hope that you all are embracing the discomfort that there's some non-closure, there's some information we still don't have, there's some planning we still need to do, but also that the relationship, it sounds like everybody's really on the same page. We want to do what's best for kids, right? We want to make sure kids are safe. I heard Ed say that very clearly. Whatever you decide as a board, we are here to support. Obviously, Drew is city manager, looking at it from the community perspective. The police department exists, and obviously there's multiple industries, including the schools, that he has to also consider. So I think the relationship that you have now, how you all revisit that, definitely I encourage it because this is going to require a lot more work than just today. There's lots of information to come forward, and we want to make sure this is a community effort, that this is something that everyone understands the relationship, because our kids not only go to schools, but they also live in the community, and we want to ensure that equitable outcomes exist for all of them, and we know that this is a very important topic. So Drew and Ed, as we close out, we know we've kept you a little longer than we wanted to, but I want to make sure that you all, if you have any final questions for the board before you jump off, we want to make sure we give you that chance. And we have some more work to do, of course, but we don't want to keep you waiting so long on a Saturday. We'd appreciate you joining us.
Sure, happy to be here. We are going to go back and look at what data we have related to the SRO program, and we'll provide that to Joan as soon as possible.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just echo that. Thank you for including us in the conversation. And whatever data we do have is obviously yours. We just want to see how we can do things better, and we'd be happy to be part of that. And so we're happy to be included, and thank you for the invite today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to real quick. I want to just thank you both as well. I know that I just want to recognize that this is a Saturday afternoon. We appreciate you being here, but also just like for your patience. And I know, I think maybe we all can kind of, we're expecting a little, like some different people to be at a different place in this conversation. So I just want to own that. But yeah, we're definitely, you know, grateful for your time, and we do want to continue the conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely, we do too. And it was our pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for having us today.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Take care.
Thanks.
Stay safe.
All right. Bye. Thank you.
All right. All right. So deep breath. I know we have about a half hour left, which I think is enough time to continue our conversation. But want to just make sure that you have a moment to breathe. If you need to do the restroom break, I'm not sure if this is a good idea. Chair yoga, whatever it is, you want to take 5 minutes, or do you want to keep moving forward so you can get done? Rebecca's like, no break, let's go.
My video is off because I'm looking for a connection before my computer dies. So sorry about that.
Okay. All right, so you good to keep going, everyone? All right, perfect. Yeah, because we wanted to end by 3 and honor your time too, because I know you all are exhausted. You've had lots of great experiences, I know in these last couple of weeks with considering reopening. So that's a whole nother conversation we'll have in a moment. So I wanted to make sure that, again, I acknowledge Kevin and Dr. Shelley as we get ready to move into the work again. They're, they'll chime in if they feel, but I want you to just at least see them, know them, because they are going to be partnering with me to help support some of this work. The SRO work is one of many things, obviously, that you're tackling around equity in the district. But as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be working with your principals and assistant principals, your district staff, to make sure that we can really support the work that you envision around equity in the district. And so I wanted to make sure they had a chance to at least meet you and see you and hear. They want to hear your vision, right? What is the work that we need to really align with our consulting to support you all in your vision? So I don't know, Kevin, if you do maybe a 30-second elevator speech, who you are, where you're from, just so they have a little context.
I will be very brief. Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Kevin Taylor. This is my 23rd year in education. I taught for 8 years in LA Unified, came back home. I'm born and raised in Oakland. Went on to found a school for Aspire Public Schools, where I stayed for 4 years. I came back home. I was principal, came back home to Oakland, was principal of McClymonds High School, where we were able to turn the school around and achieve some success using some of the strategies we institute here, culture, proficiency, and equity. From those results, I was able to elevate into the position of associate superintendent, overseeing the 17 high schools of Oakland Unified School District, before moving to Sacramento and becoming chief academic officer for a statewide program for students that have experienced discomfort along their educational journey and have failed to achieve a high school diploma. And while doing so, began doing cultural proficiency and equity work for a national organization where I met Nicole. I think that was as quick as I could do it.
I'll take a breath, huh? No, we appreciate it. And Kevin, we didn't add in that Kevin also worked closely with David in Oakland Unified. So it was really small world when we learned that we had partnered in our consulting work, but I said I was working with them, and I was like, oh, I think I know David. I think David saw Kevin's name on a slide is what it was. And so he had asked me, is that the same Kevin? So just a small world. So really excited about that. Dr. Hope, go ahead with your 30-second elevator speech introduction, because I know you jumped in with a great clarifying question, but they didn't get to officially meet you.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Shelley Holt. I am another lifelong educator, and I've worked in several districts in California and abroad in positions from teacher to superintendent. And I'm just glad to be here supporting the work of anti-racism, equity.
Uh-oh, did we lose her, or is that me?
No, my internet is getting really, really spotty, and I'm not sure why, but yeah. So I'm glad to be here supporting, and I'm looking forward to moving forward with this work with you. And yes, Mr. Chin, I was the one that presented with the NAACP.
Yeah, Ed recognized her too as well, which was interesting. So, and again, Dr. Holt's going to be supporting some of the task force work and also those community forums and make sure those are facilitated as effectively as possible. And then also Kevin will be working with our principals and site leaders and district leaders to build bandwidth and capacity to do this work that you have envisioned. So I want to jump right into kind of this piece of the work, which is really a continuation of our last workshop, if you recall. Joan went through all of the priorities that you all were kind of focusing on this year, which were quite a few. I think the SRO one was one of many. And so I think this conversation you just had was very necessary to just kind of struggle with, in a good way, productive struggle around how do we see success, right? If we envision this as a board, what we want to see around school safety. And there's a lot to unpack with that, right? There's a lot of unknowns, but there's a lot of things you do know, which is why you even came up with the resolution. So I want to make sure I affirm that, but I also want to make sure that as you consider all of the priorities that you have, all of your initiatives that you have, that we prioritize that work so you can get it done. That's my ultimate thought for you, is you want to be able to get it done. And the SRO piece is a big chunk of that, but you also have several others that you have kind of taken on this year. So I want to make sure that we can work on how do we prioritize that so you also can be effective and still apply your equity lens to this work, which is a whole nother body of work in itself. So I want to, I'm going to share my screen just with a slide just to give you a visual of kind of where I'm going with this.
And while you're sharing, I just thought our board would be interested that you are working with some other boards in the community and doing very similar processing with them.
Yeah.
So that's
absolutely
interesting to me to hear that, because it's helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Joan. How could I forget, right? So one of the things that's really impactful when I met Noelia, of course, and Joan, Ken, in our equity network was, really this real urgency for boards to do equity focused work. And so what's happened is in working with boards, we work on two kind of pieces. We work on effective governance, which is important. And then we also work on how do you actually apply that equity lens to your governance, right? So it's like two things you're marrying together. And I'm really excited because many boards in your own county have really engaged in this. And so many of you know Jefferson actually was on this morning. We spent about 3 hours and they did the same productive struggle working on their equity statement, because they're not as far as you are with adopting their statement. They're getting there, wrestling with how do we gain input from our community. They worked really hard on prioritizing their work, which is something I want to push you all to do today as well, because there's a lot of work to be done. And so many boards are learning how to really narrow down their focus. Yes, you have to govern at this 30,000 foot level, but how do you prioritize the work so equity can actually be accomplished? And knowing the limitations you have, right, to staffing, you have limitations to resources just in general, but you still want to do equity focused work. And so as boards, I'll go back to this just to kind of remind you, I don't know if you can see the screen as well. Let me do this larger one. But just reminding you what all boards have to remember: to do equity focused work, you have to be really effective at your governance practices. So I know you all are not new to this per se, but kind of new together in terms of really collectively having a real strong governance structure, because you literally have, I think, Allison, you're like, God, I just came in and COVID-19 hit, right? It's like, wow, I never even got to really understand like what the process was, right? It was just, bam, we're doing distance learning and opening schools, unprecedented. So really ensuring that you always remember your governance practices have to be solid to take on this equity work. That's going to be important. So I always want to remind you of this board assessment. We're not going to go through it, but I want to remind you, this is a tool for you all to go back to. And I would say like maybe once a quarter, it would be good to go back to this. Where are we in our vision, our shared vision? Where are we on our shared beliefs? Where are we in our accountability, right? In terms of focusing on ensuring that we're holding people accountable, but we're also providing some support and balancing that. So this is really important tool for you to use to keep yourself focused on effective governance in order to do equity work. Okay, so I just want to remind you of your tool. The other reminder in our last conversations was remembering our roles, right? So this is really hard as board members sometimes, because equity work, like really the passion of it and the intentionality of it sometimes makes us go into the space of wanting to do the work, right? You want to do the work. You actually want to like make it happen. You want to implement. And you have to remember the role of the board, again, is about vision. It's about setting the policies. It's about evaluating and monitoring the impact of this work. but the work happens under that blue line, right? So that's Joan and her team. And so that's why we're going to talk about prioritizing the work, because you want to make sure you can see it happen and you want to work together collectively as a governance team. So this requires really good communication. Sometimes you may go below that line and above the line. Notice it's dotted for a reason, because sometimes your work does blend together. But this is important to remember, especially when you're doing your work around planning, your vision, your resolutions, the goals for the district. You want to remember our roles, because this is where the work and doing equity work becomes very messy. We want to make sure you remember that. So that was just a reminder. You all have gone through that. I'm not going to go a whole lot into it. But one of the things I want to do for today is go through some of your initiatives. And this is going to be for your future study sessions as we move forward. We're together again in December, which might be a really great time to really wrestle with this, because the SRO piece is going to come up again. But prioritizing equity-driven governance work is important. And I want to draw you to the right side of the screen, where effective governance teams, again, prioritize their work. They really focus on key things that really, when making decisions, when asking questions, they fall into what we call these buckets of work. So curriculum instruction, some of you call it teaching and learning. That's huge, right? We're in the business to educate kids. That has to be a priority, right? Staffing is big. That's your HR piece. Obviously, how you spend what, 85, 90% of your budget on staff. So obviously, staffing should rise to the top in terms of quality of staff, your hiring practices, you name it. Your funding, you all have to be fiscally responsible. So your budget should always be a priority. And your budget's obviously going to align with a lot of other priorities, but your budget is really important. And so I want to make sure that's something to keep in mind as we, again, these resolutions, all these initiatives will have budget implications. And then the last one, school discipline. You guys are on that, obviously. You're around school climate. That's a priority, and that actually should be at the board level to really ensure that school safety discipline is something that's a priority. So I want to make sure you kind of get this sense of where effective governance teams who do equity work really narrow their focus so they can get it done. And if it doesn't fall into these boxes, right, this is where you have to be bold as a board to help your community understand that there may be some things they're really interested in, but it's not a priority. And it's not to say it's not important and that's not going to be addressed, but it's not a priority. And that's something as a team you collectively have to be comfortable saying to your community, especially when things come up that may not directly impact student achievement, right? When they don't have equity implications, you're going to have to really prioritize it. So I want you to think about these kind of 4 buckets and just think again, teaching, learning, budget, staffing, school discipline. Okay, just kind of think about it in that sense just for a moment. And there may be some other things you want to think about, but I want you to just kind of narrow your focus for a moment. And I want you to look at your current priorities that you actually have now. I think you all can see those. So this is what Joan shared in September. Okay, so take a look at those. And some of them I'm familiar with, some of them I'm not, because I haven't been with you all in detail with everything. But just take a look at those. And think about how are we going to prioritize getting this done. Just want to just remind you, and these are not everything, by the way. There's lots of other things that go into running the school district, but when you think about from a governance standpoint, these are things that's bubbled up to your plate.
All of them.
Yes, all of them, yes.
A lot of them too are under the same umbrella, right? So
they could be, yes. Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say
go ahead, Noelia.
There might be a way for us to like prioritize them differently. So for example, like the sanctuary task force, that is something that's like staff led, that's happening on a weekly basis. And so it would be a different category than like distance learning, hybrid learning, full, return to school. Our equity task force as well also happens like, not, it's already like in process happening. Yeah.
And to kind of build off of that, I think also, I mean, and I mentioned this last time, I think it's important not just to have the policy headings, but whose umbrella they fall under. What is the time that it takes, like currently at the district level and staff level and board level, because that also matters, right? Like we're not taking, kind of to Noelia's point, like we're not taking all of these things that like haven't started and they all take the exact same amount of time and now we need to prioritize them, right? It's like, where do they fall? How much time do they take? Whose time are they taking? And I think really we can only prioritize when we have all that information. I mean, we can prioritize within this before we have that, but that's going to make a lot of difference in terms of what we actually focus on. The other way I see this driving work is these things should be constantly referenced in our task builder, right? All of these things should be appearing on our task builder consistently throughout the year. And so if they're not, that's a good place for us to start in terms of, you know, at least having them at the table in terms of things that we're discussing on a consistent basis.
Yeah. Thank you for sure for that. And part of the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's going to be the task for the board is to figure out how do you prioritize this work, right? You all set agendas and your community is seeing this, right? Your community, I mean, you got a lot going on, right? And some of these are just normal things that go on all the time. A facilities master plan, pretty common to have that, right? You have your safety plan. You have all these different things that are kind of part of running a school district. But then you have some additional things that have been added to that. So how do you prioritize based on time frame, right? So the SRO resolution, I'll just use because we just talked about today. You had a time frame of December 31st. So I was really happy to hear that you've given yourself some time to make that happen, because you have to really be clear on who's going to do the work. So I appreciate, Shara, you bringing that up, right? How do we departmentalize these things? Who has to do these? And what often happens is when you actually even do that particular prioritization, a lot of these things fall on the same department. Right? So how do we build bandwidth to do this? How do we leverage the task force to make this work happen, but also align it with our timeline? So when we say priority, which thing happens now, which thing happens later, right? And which thing just, I don't want to say doesn't happen at all, but which things kind of get pushed to the back that aren't as important. And so I want you to think about it. And actually, I want you to think again in these 4 buckets, going back to this slide here. Teaching and learning, that curriculum instruction piece. Okay, I want you to think about that as a priority. Your staffing, huge priority. Your budget, huge priority. And then of course, discipline. So I want you to think about it in those 4 buckets. And I want you for a moment to, I'm going to share my screen with another document, but I want you to again, process these and see where do you think these things even fit in prioritizing them, so we can start to look at what needs to be taken care of now. What kind of things do we need to push to the side? And I say side, meaning it's not the urgent time frame right this moment. Because I think that's going to help you all be able to actually implement your equity-driven governance from the roles that you play. Okay, so I want to just, I'm going to switch screens in one moment. Just give me a second. But I want to, again, ask you about things that really stick out to you that are a priority. And priority means now, right? Like, what are those things that are urgent we need to address now? And so I want you to just call some of those things out for a moment. Okay, and then I'm going to pull up my screen in a moment as I'm hearing you. So go ahead and just unmute your mic. What are some things that are priorities right now?
The first one.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Was that Allison?
Yeah, I just did the first one because that's like what we're kind of in the middle of right now with distance learning, hybrid learning, full return to school. That one.
I'm gonna
go ahead, Rebecca.
No, go.
No, you're good. You're good.
I think it's equity, the equity task force and programs, sanctuary task force, special education program, ethnic studies. I think if we are focused, equity focused, then that needs to be our top priority, because it's gonna take a long time to make these changes, these positive changes, right? So we can't keep putting them on like the back burner. And so I think that really needs to be our full focus, because with distance learning and hybrid and a full return to school, that in my mind encompasses curriculum and learning.
Right.
And so we want the curriculum and learning to represent just have it be implemented in a way that is true.
Got it. Okay, and I'm sorry, what I'm going to do, I'm trying to pull up for you because I want to take notes, and as I'm listening to you, and I want to make sure that it pops up correctly on your screen is mine, so I apologize. But keep going, I'm listening, and I'm going to just stop share for a minute because I think it's just freezing is what's happening. Keep going, though, I'm listening.
I was going to chime in. This is sort of the problems living in our two-dimensional world. I know that if we were meeting in person, we'd probably have, you know, your big Post-its, and we'd probably go through and mark things up and put like stickers on our priorities or something else like that. And so I'm feeling like we need a whiteboard to actually go through this. But I would agree, like with Trustee Watkins again, is the idea is that, I mean, I think distance learning is the overall, right? That's the number one priority. That's what we're in. But there's lots of little buckets there that I think different groups, you know, would probably be their number one. And I'm thinking of some sort of chart, Excel chart or somewhere where you could sort of rank them or prioritize them underneath the umbrella of distance learning, because, you know, that's currently what we're dealing with. And I think that's what we're really going to be working on over the next couple of months as we try and, you know, bring kids back to school at some point. So, but I do think that there are groups that maybe don't have a significant role in that may be able to focus on, you know, their number one. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, so I'm not looking at it now, so I'm just trying to remember.
Sorry, I'll
so
pull
definitely
it back. I apologize. I'll pull it back.
That's okay, thank you. Our distance learning is definitely priority. That's what our kids need right now, and the quality of that is number one. But I also think about, you know, our sanctuary task force and the fact that, you know, they're meeting once a week at this point because there are so many needs in our community, and you know, we're talking about, you know, food distribution, getting information to families about how to get their most basic needs met, and it's kind of like a, you know, like every meeting that we have, there's space to talk about, all right, are there any like urgent needs in our community right now? Let's talk about how we can get the ball rolling on that, right? Other than that, yeah, I mean, I think our learning continuity and attendance plan is also something super relevant for right now while we're in distance learning. Yeah, special education, and, you know, how like there are so many of our special needs students right now that, you know, they're not getting the services that they were used to that they need, right? Like speech in person is different than speech over a computer. Maybe speech isn't the best example. Like the other, you know, OT, other services. I know, like, for example, our assessments, we're talking right now about our assessments and how we're going to get that done. So yeah, I think, like, I like the idea of categorizing with, like, what do we need right now, and like, what can we, I really believe in ethnic studies, but if our students are not even getting through all of the curriculum they have now, then maybe that can wait a little bit, right? Like, so yeah.
And I appreciate this discussion because I think this is going to be something you're going to be wrestling with for a while. And I want you to know that this is the future study sessions we'll continue to unpack is how do we prioritize our work? And I know, like, ethnic studies is near and dear to my heart, Noelia, when you brought that one up, and it's hard to say, like, I'm going to put that back, right? Push it back. But the reality is this, we want to do this work right. So we don't want to push ethnic studies and then it go into implementation and then it be what I call a train wreck, right? Because we didn't front load enough to make sure our teachers are ready, right? To make sure there's a belief system and an understanding how to implement that in an equitable way. So I think this is why I go back to what do you want to prioritize? And I'm hearing you calling out some things that are super urgent right now. And I think the board has to really focus on that. That distance learning is obviously here. Every board in America is dealing with it. So quite naturally, it's in the moment in time, you got to deal with it. But what are those things that are going to be, when you're setting those agendas moving forward, what are those things that are going to be the priority? And what are those things that you need to maybe put, I don't want to call it the back burner, that's not the best term for it, but what are those things that are less of a priority right now? So that's what I'm wanting you all to kind of call out. And then what I'm doing, I'm kind of listening. I know Joan is taking notes, but in our future study session, we're going to have to continue to break down what this looks like so that you have a plan moving forward. Because the other thing that may not be clear, even let's use the SRO resolution as an example. We didn't really have a plan when we created the resolution. So then what happens is we're now trying to gather that data to inform our plan. And so that's an example of how we really want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what we want to do going forward. And even in our resolutions, which are huge, you got to really call out the things that are most critical and important based on your shared vision. But you also want to make sure you can do those things effectively. And so that's what you want to make sure is really clear around, again, prioritizing that work. So I hope that makes sense.
Can we make sure that the next time we come back to this this conversation that we have departments under which they fall, what is new work that hasn't started, what is existing work that we're maintaining? I just, like, I want to make sure that when we're having, like, we're setting aside this time when we're having these discussions that we're able to, like, take a step forward. And I feel like we talked about this, right? And we're not like, this hasn't like taken us forward necessarily. Like, it's good to revisit it, but we can't just keep revisiting it, right? Like, at a point we actually have to make a decision. And I just don't think we have all the information that we need to do that. And so I think if we can have departments, and Joan, I think it would be helpful to actually get a sense from departments, like, I would like to know how they would do that, right? What are all of the things on this list that are under your umbrella? What are you doing? How are you feeling about that? Like, what do you feel like if you were to add one or two things to your plate, what would those be? That would be helpful for us to have a sense of, and it might not always align with what we then end up prioritizing, but at least we have that information from staff in terms of what their priorities are. Because I do think, you know, our staff is very equity minded and focused. And I think that they're going to have some great insights that they'll be able to bring. I want to make sure that when we come back to this conversation in a couple of months, that we have the information that we need in order to, like, really take a step forward in terms of actually identifying what these are going to be. I think having our agenda builder at that time is going to be good. Making sure that we have that information. So we can really have something concrete.
Joan, I think this will be a good time as superintendent to jump in and kind of share that perspective. I think I'm hearing like Shar has a great point about, like, it'd be good for us as a board to know, like, as we're passing these resolutions, like, we want to have context of how this lands in implementation. And then Joan, I know also as a superintendent, there's obviously, like, there's the direction that the staff needs on, okay, we have this resolution, we have these expectations, but what is the vision for that? I think is also where we want to make sure we're really clear on our communication in terms of moving forward. So Joan, maybe you can just jump in a little bit and share kind of context on what the staff really needs from the board.
So I think that this item is coming up. It hasn't come up in the past. And I think what we've done is just take on new ideas and new initiatives and then internally created timelines and steps to make sure the initiatives could play out. The issue that is coming up is the amount of time that the DL and hybrid and full return is taking, and the fact that we had to write yet another, what they're calling learning continuity and attendance plan. So then we had these other initiatives, and so it's a push me, pull you kind of situation where we normally just take the initiatives, start creating the internal plan and march them down the road. I think what I'm trying to find out is what are things that are most important to you, you know, philosophically and theoretically. I'm hearing from you that you need to know more about the internal planning that would need to happen for each of those in order to make the decision of what we would go forward with, because they're big ticket items. So I'll go back and work with staff on the different areas that they're already working on that are in the works, and talk to them about these different initiatives so that we can march it out, and then you can see what the work will entail. So I think it's a back and forth. What is the board's direction? Where do you want to go? Staff want to support that, but the reason I've brought it up is it's in this year that we're dealing with. We're going to have to decide how far we're going to get, or even if we're going to be able to do all of the pieces. So I'll get more information for you so that you can see what it's going to entail. And I understand what you're asking. I had just thought that you might have some areas that were very, very important to you. So then we would be able to know that and work forward. But let me go the other direction, and I'll have that ready.
Yeah. And I think this is a really healthy but tough conversation that boards and superintendents have to have. And I think this is important. Joan, I appreciate you saying, like, this is kind of our first time we've really come to having these discussions about prioritizing our work. Because again, like, take COVID-19 out of it, we may be having a different discussion right now, but I think we would still have the same discussion. Like, we have to make sure we really we're on the same page as far as what our work looks like. And so here's where I want to, kind of push you to think about. I'm going to share my screen. I don't know why.
Well, and while you're sharing, I'll just say that, we've been together for 5 years. This is our 6th year. I've never had to say, I think we have to prioritize something here. But the level of intensity that's gone on with DL and hybrid has taken over all the departments. Every department has been affected by it. So, I think every single piece that we've put up there is important. Every single thing there should be moved forward. Absolutely. And it should be moved forward this year. I just don't know that we can pull all of it off within the time with this situation that we're dealing with. So let me bring back kind of what it really looks like. And then we can decide where we stand with it all.
Okay. Sorry to chime in, just because it is a difficult year and all these things are important. Yeah. I think like the overarching thing for me is just, we might have to prioritize some things that aren't as, I don't know, deep, if you will, but I just always want everything to be looked through an equitable and inclusive lens. And I think that's where I'm coming from in terms of distance learning. Yes, but how do we make it work for everybody and include everybody?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's really the spirit of the work, right? You're prioritizing your work because you want to do it in an equitable fashion. And it's hard to do that when you have lots going on. So I'm going to share kind of what notes I'm going to capture. And we're going to continue this dialogue. This is really important. And so I put your priorities here because this was the list, the bullet point. I don't know if you can even see it that well. You have to blow it up a little bit. It's hard for me to see. But what I'll be using is a working document throughout the year with you all to help us prioritize and create a plan that helps drive our agendas. So I appreciate, Shar, you bringing up the agenda builder because I think it's important, like how do we prioritize what our meetings look like, we're going to spend time on. And these are all, again, just straight from the PowerPoint, right? But what I want you to think about is this: the board needs more information. So I heard you say we need more information from Joan and staff on who's impacted by the work, what are the needs of the staff, what are really a priority for the staff, right? So I think that will help and inform the board's work. And then also a superintendent and the staff needs to really hear clear vision on what this work is, right? Like what is like if you pass a resolution, you got to be really clear on what that looks like, how it lands for the staff, right? What are they expected to do? Obviously, task force, all those groups, what does that look like, and being really clear with the vision. Clear timelines that are going to be, obviously you have to collaborate on what that timeline looks like. And then what are those priorities? I think it's going to be important so the staff really knows what is it we need to put this down and let's run to do this, right? Because there's all these things that have to be done. What is it that the board wants to prioritize? And so with this bullet points, I want to, just based on some of the discussions I've heard, And Joan, I know you have some notes too. If you want to share yours, I'm going to try to prioritize these so you all can see them more visually in our next space. So where does this line with the board's role in budget, fiscal oversight? That's going to be important because your jobs are to make sure that the district is fiscally sound, and the initiatives will have impacts on the budget. So that's one piece I want to help prioritize. Your school climate piece, that's one that you're going to always keep at the forefront, and I think that's a really important priority. So I'm going to take some of those bullet points and literally place them in that space based on what I heard you say. The other two priorities, staffing, I think that's going to continue to come up because you're going to talk about like diversity of staffing, which is something your task force is tackling right now, is one of their focus areas. So we want to make sure staffing is something that you keep thinking about. Your 85, 90% of your budget goes towards staff. So that has to be a priority in terms of quality of staff and effectiveness of staff. And then that priority around curriculum and instruction is going to be huge. And a lot of what you shared is actually around curriculum instruction. So we're going to prioritize those. And as you see them, then next time we come back, we're going to have to start really like unpacking what is it that we're going to spend our time and energy on to make sure we're good at it with an equity lens. The ultimate goal of a governance team is to take a data point, an equity gap, and close it. And again, implementation science talks about it might take 10 years to do that. So we're going to have to prioritize what even that equity gap is we're going to tackle. What is it? And if it's discipline, then let's tackle discipline and let's be great at it, right? If we're going to try to do staffing and diversify staff, let's be great at it. Let's get it done. But if we try to do way too many, we're not going to close any gaps. And that's what I ultimately don't want you to feel defeated in your work in the long run, because you're creating a legacy, not only for the generations to come, but also the board members who are going to come in the future. You are setting the tone now. So I hope you see the struggle, the non-closure is part of the work that you're creating for system change. Okay, and that's part of the messiness of this work is it's system change. So it's going to take you time to do this, but I want to make sure in your time together, you have several board meetings between now and December 5th, which is our next study session. So what I'll do is be in contact with Noelia, Joan, about what maybe you can think about in terms of tackling little pieces of this as you're continuing to move forward, because you got to, again, prioritize the work so you get it done. Okay, so I hope that helps a little bit, and want to make sure that in our next steps is really clear kind of where we're going, because the last piece of this is you got to have a plan on how you're going to get all this done, right? And I think that's going to be the big piece. What's the role of the board? What is the role of the staff, superintendent to make this happen? Okay.
Nicole, can I ask one question? Could you scroll up to the list?
The list, yep.
For next time, for some of these items, could we learn a little bit more about what they mean? Because to me, like when I'm thinking of priorities, some of these are just like tasks kind of thing. Like, I mean, you adopt social studies, curriculum, and then some things are more of like idea focused. And so I just would like to know a little bit more about each of them, because like sanctuary task force, to me, like obviously that's a priority, but it's different than just like doing something and checking it off the list. And I know it's much more, all of these are much more involved than just checking off the list, but just understanding a bit more about what they all mean.
Sure. That's what I'll plan to do, because because for example, an adoption is a very lengthy process, and we're even struggling with figuring out how to do an adoption pilot in the world we're living in right now. So that process takes months. You take all the publishers do presentations, you take materials, you use them in the classroom, you use a rubric. I mean, that's one reason it's on there, is it's not a small process, and it's the same staff involved with all of the return to school. So, it is, and it's a big step though in our equity work, social studies and ethnic studies. I mean, those two are interrelated. So I can see that we need to flesh those out for you so you can better see the processes, and we'll do it that way.
Thanks. Does everyone feel good about that? As good as you'll feel? Like, this is non-closure moment, so there's never a good feeling about non-closure, but recognizing
Yeah, I think that's definitely the right direction. Thank you.
Okay. Good. And so in moving forward and kind of closing, we're together on December 5th, but I want to remind you that we're here to support you in between. So all of you have my cell number, my email. We can definitely touch base individually, just so you all, honor the Brown Act individually as we continue to work towards this. This is part of the work, right? It's not just about board meeting, we're done. Like, the work in between is part of the struggle. So I definitely am always here to be a thought partner. Kevin, Shelley, we're all here as thought partners, even getting to know them and the work that they're doing with the collective district. But just want to acknowledge you for a moment on the hard work you're doing. This is not easy work. Even doing this work in public is not easy. I want to acknowledge the work of Joan as superintendent. There's many superintendents around the nation who are literally like losing their mind, their hair, and everything else, because this is one of the hardest moments in history to work in education. And so I want to just acknowledge that you're still laser focused on doing the right thing for kids. That's a big deal. And every board is not doing that. Every board is not about kids. It might be about some other interest, some other political space. We're right in the middle of political elections, and you're really staying focused on what's right. So I just want to acknowledge that. I really do. And I want to support and absolutely see your success in terms of seeing equity really play itself out in your district for your kids for years to come. And so I just want to acknowledge that and hope that you all see that the productive struggle is necessary, but hopefully you see that you are having progress moving forward, that you're not moving backwards. You're moving forward. And a lot of this we're going to be learning together, gathering more data, but it is going to take time. And so I want to make sure that you can really embrace that non-closure. But just thank you all for speaking your truth and being fully engaged in this work. It's a big deal. So I just want to thank you for that and just honor it to be able to support you. There's lots of boards who, I get to brag about you all with in terms of the work that you're doing and really trying to work collectively as a team. It's a big deal. I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for your work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of you, Nicole Anderson.
I was like, wow, we all look different, huh?
Yeah, we're looking forward to you all.
Excellent. So please, again, reach out in between. Joan, I'll be in touch with you. Noelia, I'll reach out to you as well as president, just to make sure, we're good for moving forward, because there's a lot of work to be done. But that's what we're here to support you all, because we know you also have other jobs you do, right, besides being board members. So we're here to support that. All right. So any closing thoughts? I'll pass the mic to Noelia or Joan. I don't know if you had any closing thoughts before we close out. You all are past your 3 o'clock deadline on Saturday. Shame on us.
Yeah, I'll take it. I just want to thank one of our local city council members, Rick Bonilla, for being on the call and bearing, and just hanging in there with us. And thank you to all the attendees. We appreciate you taking the time out of your Saturday. And the work continues. Thanks, everyone. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Roll call. Trustee Shin.
Aye.
Trustee Hitchcock.
Aye.
Trustee Proctor.
Yes.
Trustee Watkins.
Yes.
And a yes for me. We're adjourned at 3:12. Thank you, everyone, for being with us.
Thank you.
Have a good week.